Then welcome to tonight's meeting at Middleton City Hall. I will call the meeting of the Plan Commission to order on today, May 9th. I would like to introduce Alder Hanairo joining us in Plan Commission and Aaron Summers. I would also like to thank our special guest, Suvit from Laos, who's visiting. With that, I would like to call roll call, please.
Bruce.
Here.
Erdman Hermans. Here. Harp.
Here.
Hanairo.
Here.
Schaefer.
Here.
Summers. Here. And Mayor Kuhn is present.
And the first item on the agenda is the rezoning from R3A, high density residential. Oh, my apologies.
Minutes.
Can we have the approval of the minutes? Do I have a motion?
I would move we accept the submission of the minutes.
And do I have a second?
I will second.
And all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So thank you for helping me. The first item is rezoning from R3A to Plan Development District General Implementation Plan, or PDD GIP, Middleton Shores Redevelopment, 6110-6150 Century Avenue. With that, does staff have short comments?
Sure. So this was before you at the public hearing on March 28th. There was a hearing held on this rezoning request, and then there was a conditional use permit hearing as well, which is the next agenda item. The staff report lists the background behind this, underlying this request, and we also have on the screen the conclusions we reached, a summary of the conclusions, and a potential motion that the Plan Commission could adopt if they were so amenable to approving the rezoning, recommending approval of the rezoning to the council, which is what the city staff recommendation is. So that's my report, and I would also acknowledge that there's 3 applicants here representing the project if you have any questions.
Okay. With that, do I have a motion to start discussion?
I'll make a motion to start discussion.
Okay. Do I have a second?
What was the motion for?
To start discussion.
Oh, start discussion. Yeah, I'll second the discussion.
Okay.
So what, I'm sorry for the notes. What motion are you?
What motion are you making?
She she wanted to start discussion, so we're starting discussion. I think it's
I think you have to put a
Have to-
formal motion on the
We
table.
have to
beyond
do
that.
like an approve or not approve or.
before we do that, could we ask the applicant to come on up and just explain what's new and different from the previous meeting?
Absolutely. My name is Kathleen Laird. I'm with Corbin Associates Architects, and I'm representing the owner, who's also here and willing to take questions and comments as well. So I can briefly summarize what we have submitted to Mark and his team since you saw us last, to kind of address some of the questions and concerns that we heard both from the community and from this commission. So sort of taking a global look at it, we did add the master site plan showing phase 2 as you requested. And I believe is up on the screen now for your reference. And so that does show the potential for what phase 2 could look like down the road at a future date. And of course, we'd like to execute phase 1 first, see what we can learn from that experience, see what the market needs are at the time of phase 2, and then revisit it with your assistance at that time. So this is a working concept. But I think overall, the main takeaway of this master plan is just how we approach the organization of it. We really looked at the site as a whole and decided that for phasing purposes and to kind of embed ourselves into the fabric of the surrounding context, it was best organized into 4 quadrants. With the first development, as you can see happening, we're going to call it Plan Southwest, if you will, and then the second phase happening adjacent to that, and really focusing on developing towards Century Avenue for a number of reasons that I'll hit upon, but mostly because it's it was a goal of ownership to maintain 2 acres or almost 2 acres of open land when we were done, and to really take a step back away from the conservancy. So we were looking to do a very compact footprint for both buildings, as compact as we could, to preserve that goal. Another question that came up was in regards to the height. Okay, so it did take us to get to 7 stories to achieve that reservation of the 2 acres up against the conservancy. So we did need to go up to maintain that really compact footprint for both buildings. And we really feel like that was a great way to balance the site and to really, again, integrate ourselves into the neighborhood. Another reason that we were looking at this project as 7 stories occurring at grade, which we wouldn't typically do on a lot of our other developments, is because of the soil and water table conditions that we're aware of at this time. So we did add to our submittal the geotechnical report, one that was done in 2020. Sorry, Mark, I'm jumping around, but I appreciate it. And if you delve into that report, you can kind of see that as we move away from the conservancy, we improve our soil conditions dramatically, which is great. Another reason why we organized the site the way that we did and tried for that really compact footprint. We also noticed that, there's a note about very dynamic water table levels occurring on this site with its proximity to the lake. And so we wanted to be responsible design professionals and not try to push this building into the ground where we know we would have issues at a future date, and trying to also offer the greatest amount of flexibility to our client in terms of what could occur at that grade level, which we've continued to explore with Mark and the team, and we'll discuss tonight as well. So that geotechnical information has been added. Also related to the building height that we are requesting was a concern about shadows. So we have submitted shadow studies that you can see up on your screens for both phases. So we included phase 1, and then there's a second slide there that encompasses both phase 1 and phase 2. And what this really demonstrates is that at the trickiest time of the year, winter solstice, right at noon, our shadows really only reach the easternmost curb cut of Marina Drive. So we're not touching the residents themselves. What will impact them, or does at this time, is the mature tree line. That is far more impactful than our development is. And so for the purpose of this study, we did remove those trees so you could clearly see what the impact of our proposed development would be, and not have it obscured by what exists there now. And that strip of land will be maintained as it is. It is not part of this particular piece of property. And so they will continue to just have basically the conditions that they do now. We also added a diagram to address parking. I know that was another question mark in the Plan Commission's mind as to what we were trying to achieve there. And so we included a diagram just to explain that our goal really was to contain our new building's needs within its 4 walls, and to also take on some of the burden of the things you don't want to see in your community, snow removal equipment and some of the maintenance equipment that is kept on site. All could be contained and out of sight for the community. Additionally, we were looking at accommodating some enclosed parking for the northern building that exists and will stay, the 6150 building, so that some of those residents would have another option, and we're able to achieve that. And then third, within the site, because we were able to preserve this almost 2 acres of continuous green space, ownership wanted to allocate some parking spots, surface parking spots, for the purpose of the community so that they can use the trailhead and take some pressure off of Marina Drive, as well as some guest parking spaces. And so that is all part of that diagram that you saw. And lastly, I think one thing that we talked about at length with Mark last week is the Century Avenue facade, because we do have to be at grade. What can we do to activate that facade as we hopefully move forward into the SIP phase with all of you? And so those discussions have started earlier because the question came up, which is great. So talking with ownership and their ideas, and also Mark and their concern, we came up with some great starter ideas that we look forward to developing further in the SIP. More specifically, using that at grade location where we have the 2-story lobby space, and building upon that and adding the fitness component down at that level as a liner to the parking that sits behind it. We also have some ideas about elements and amenities that would also engage with the public way and in a natural and wonderful adjacency, such as a bike maintenance shop, maybe some bike rentals, which are not available in the area right now when we looked at the existing network. So that might be a nice way to engage that area. And also another amenity that we're seeing in most of these facilities are a pet care center as well. All things that could come along that street line and engage it further and shield that parking component. And so with that, I think we've kind of addressed most of the concerns from last time, but I'm sure you still have questions, so I'm happy to take those.
This project is exciting, and it's the developers, been a member of the community for such a long time. I'm really hopeful for this project to move forward. The concerns that I had and expressed at the last Plan Commission, although you've certainly tried to answer them, I just, in my mind, have just not been addressed yet.
Okay.
I think we're trying to get density at certain locations in the city, certainly within the Avenue mixed use areas. And we're trying to do that to encourage, obviously, mass transit use and other forms of circulation. So it's a little contrary to that goal to then also add as much parking as being added to this development at the expense of then pushing the height above the 5 stories, to require this conditional use.
So is your comment then that we should have less parking?
My comment is that I would not want to see us push the building height up to accommodate more hot parking. That's really it.
So how many less parking spots?
I guess what I would suggest is if we are going to, if we feel like 5 or 7 stories is required to get this done, then what my suggestion would be to try to line the exterior of that parking with uses at least on Century Avenue, if not on the other sides, the minimum Century Avenue. And for us not to have 2 levels of parking before we get up to a, active use.
Okay, hold on.
Yep.
Hold on. So as staff, when I asked how many less parking spots, I know that you had comments on page 2 per the notes. I read through them this weekend, but I can't seem to pull them up. So can you respond to the parking before we move on? I'm going to let John ask a question and then we'll get back to you.
Sure. And I was going to rely on the screen, but I'm finding that I can't. So.
I'm having issues with my internet as well. So if you need a minute.
Yeah. So So, Mayor, you're asking, your question is how much parking we recommend?
Yes, how much does staff recommend? Because Bruce is saying that we don't need as much.
Yeah, I guess my
And I
res-
understand that they are trying to help with the community, but there must be something that staff is thinking.
So I guess the way I would respond to that is that this is the general implementation plan. And this is where we establish the parameters of the intensity of the use and height and setbacks and the land uses. But the question that Commissioner Bruce is raising is related to the height. So that's where, it's a little hard to answer this. I think it's appropriate without getting into exact parking numbers. I will say that we have in the past allowed essentially a 1-to-1 ratio for dwelling unit, one space per dwelling unit. And this is providing quite a bit more than that, but they are, as they noted, trying to address parking from an existing building to the north. And they don't wish to go below ground because of water table issues. So I think it's entirely appropriate to establish a condition that if the building is going to have this height, that there needs to be certain standards met for the front of the building along Century, as Commissioner Bruce mentioned, at a minimum.
Okay.
And how that use and how everything, all the space is allocated, I think is more appropriately addressed at an SIP, the specific implementation level.
Yeah, Mark, if I could comment, you're talking about this SIP, but they're asking for zoning. They're asking us to rezone it. That's beyond an SIP. I mean, we don't even have an SIP yet. And we're being asked to rezone and
No,
conditions
I
of
know,
something.
and parking, I mean, these things are all part of it, but to get into exact numbers and exact plan, I think it's hard to give an answer. What Abby was just pointing out to me is that the procedure, the things that are considered as part of the GIP are defined by order.
Yeah.
And thank you. Parking facilities in general, yeah, but it doesn't talk about exact, well. General development plan of the proposed project showing at least the following information to sufficient detail to make possible evaluation against criteria for approval. So driveways and parking facilities. So, I mean, the number, I don't have a specific number, Mayor, to answer your question. I think if you would like us to work further with the applicant to develop an alternative, that's the guidance you can give us here tonight. But I'm not prepared to specific answer in terms of how much parking can be reduced and how else to allocate the space.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
I don't mind.
Thank you. I said I would refer to Commissioner Schaefer and Alder Nairo.
Yeah, a number of concerns. Unfortunately, I missed the one meeting, but so I went back in detail, read all the public comments, read through the minutes and everything. And I remember Randy's comment said, cut the parking down to 1-on-1, you could lower a floor. That was one of your suggestions. One thing that you didn't address at all, and I have concern here, is almost every single person who was at the public hearing talked about pedestrian traffic and that the intersection right now is very dangerous and it's not at all adaptable for suddenly adding, 100 new cars coming into this thing. We've been dealing with this development about a block away at where the Captain Bills were, and we're still, I think, waiting for a traffic study because the same concerns came out that we're flooding this intersection and that whole area was so much traffic, and suddenly we're talking about adding, upwards of more than 100 units over these phases with traffic just pumping out into that intersection. And then the fact is, I think we're putting the horse before the cart on this.
I will stop you on that. Are you talking about the traffic study for Captain Bill's or for this event?
For the Captain Bills, yeah.
I believe we had the traffic study.
Okay, it hasn't come back to the commission yet.
Oh.
There was condition. So usually what we do with traffic studies. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
There's the conditions of, that's always a condition of approval to make sure that the issues raised by the TIA are addressed to the satisfaction of the city engineer. That's a common condition of approval. And that is, I believe, as Abby noted, that.
Okay, last time it
Bills,
came
I
up, I
would think
believe
that
you
would have
said
been
we were
done.
still waiting for.
It was.
I was gonna say, okay, yeah, no, this one's not begun yet.
No, I'm talking about the Captain Bill ones. I'm saying we still haven't resolved all the traffic issues there, have you?
That's actually, I can't speak to Captain Bill's, and that's not before us. I don't know the answer.
Well,
to that
okay,
question.
so regardless of Captain Bill's, it's
Yeah.
the intersection's very crowded, and I think they're suddenly putting a lot of units. I think that I'm concerned about the 7 stories. We with other areas, we determined there's not a single building east of of the Beltline that has more than 5 stories. It's in the city master plan to keep it at 5 stories. And I think that the idea of keeping green space, while sort of admirable, the green space is basically for use, when I can see the map, for the people in these apartments. And that the 7 stories becomes then sets a precedence that I know is going to get argued by many other developers coming in and say, well, they did it, we can do it too. And I'm not sure that you've argued successfully to me that there's a rationale for 7 stories to be able to just keep all of that green space in there.
All right.
So,
Before,
but
before
the
you
pedestrians,
respond to
I'm,
that,
I'm concerned about the traffic issues. Let me
Understood.
finish, please, yeah.
Mhm.
And so that's a big thing. And so with 7 stories, and also, I mean, even if you reduce it to 5 stories, I presume you would push the units there. So these are disconnected issues, but I'm concerned about the 7 stories. We talk about part of the rationale for 5 stories in the city is because we continue to have density next to single families and all of these transitional areas. We don't have a huge section of the city that's really conducive to a bunch of tall buildings. And I think 7 stories is too big for this spot. So, all right, that's,
I do appreciate
Yeah.
you sharing that. And I don't want you to respond just yet, but
Okay.
focusing on traffic and height.
Yeah.
Okay, and did I miss anything? Traffic height?
the traffic and the pedestrian, the safety
And the
issues and the
pedestrian.
height issues were the 2 issues. I think I agree with Commissioner Bruce that it's a great project. It's a good place for it. I think that it's a lot of wrangling to get it to work and be really conducive space. But I'm for the project. I'm not against the rezoning of it. I'm concerned at the moment against the 5 stories. And I think we need to do a lot of thinking engineering wise as to how to fit this into the intersection.
The 7 stories, John. You said
7 stories, yeah. I'm against the 7 stories.
Okay, Alder Haniro.
Well, I was going to ask specifically about the parking, any changes that you made since the night of the hearing? How has the number of spaces dropped and what's the ratio now?
So the number of spaces has remained unchanged, but the dialogue that I wanted to share with you too is that we see that there's some flexibility in this. And I understand that this process doesn't really work towards that flexibility, but just to open the dialogue of what we're thinking is that we feel like Middleton has made some great progress in multimodal transportation options. But we also live in the Midwest where there's winter and so from our experience, and I think Sue is going to speak to this specifically, the market demand for a parking space is still there because we haven't tipped the scales just yet. We're moving in the right direction. You are all moving in the right direction. But what we see in the market is that most individuals, most households still have a vehicle that needs a place to be. And they will opt for these multimodal options when they can, when the weather is conducive, when their errand is appropriate for bike riding or walking, but they still have that backup vehicle that they need to park somewhere. So we're really using the depth of history that Sue and Anna have with their other properties to kind of craft that number. But in the grand scheme of things, the way that we see it, and again, I realize this doesn't fit with a rigid process like this, is our hope is that we like to contain that within our 4 walls so that it's out of sight. And additionally, as we start to tip the scales, we would love to return some of those surface parking spots to green space. So as we see less demand needed from this development, that could be returned to that green space that we're hoping to achieve. So again, that's probably not, a great answer for the type of process that we're all being asked to work within, but that's the vision that the owners have. I think additionally, we had expressed to Mark some flexibility too, because we're actually offering more parking than we need to be, obviously, because we're very cognizant of the concerns that the Marina Drive residents have. And they already have pressure on their street for parking opportunities for the trailhead. And so we thought, well, trying to be a good neighbor and to create a sense of place so that they do feel like they can use that green space, could we provide them with some visitor parking spaces and also some trailhead parking to just, try to alleviate another problem that's right next to us. And so we're flexible on continuing this discussion, but just kind of our mindset going into this.
But the green space and the parking for the trailhead, that's phase 2.
It is, yes. Mhm.
I guess I'm just wondering to address Commissioner Bruce's concern about, and Commissioner Schaefer's as well. If you lost one of the levels of parking and instead had a 6-story building, is that feasible? Could you still?
And again, if Sue, if you want to speak to the numbers that you've experienced, we feel like it would be detrimental to the development and that it would be a detraction in terms of marketing, because if we run out of spaces for residents, obviously they'll go elsewhere.
Hi, I'm Sue Cates. I'm the property manager since 1993, Middleton Shores, and also one of the owners. So the new building, the 61, we call it new, it was 1999, but the newer building has 42 units. It has 18 twos and 23 ones, 24 ones, one is the office. So of those 42 units, we've counted the cars that the tenants own, and there's 67 cars. And that's 1.6 is the number. And most of these are, and there's a preponderance of 1-bedrooms here too. So that's the kind of ratios we're looking at. We also manage and own Heathercrest on Old Sauk Road. And we have a 40-unit project. It's all 2-bedrooms. And we have 60-some parking spots, including the garages. And the parking has gotten so vicious there that we've had to hire towing companies and parking permits, and nobody can have guests after 9 o'clock at night. And then we had people parking, and emergency nurses and tow trucks have to come in the middle of the night. It's kind of a nightmare, and people actually move from the project because the parking is so tight. And I think that's just now. I mean, I think things are going to change. So when we look at the building that Kathleen has helped with, there's 100 parking spots on the 2 levels, and then there's 110, so that's 22 per floor. Okay, so if you take off 100 parking spots, 1 level of parking, so now you've got 110 units and 100 spots of parking, and that's not going to work. And we talk about 200 parking spots, but actually I think that's reduced by the trash compactor. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would be as we investigate.
Yeah, I mean, we have indoor trash. The compactor takes spots. We want to put a maintenance shop inside the garage. We want room for storage of our plow and our mowers. And then also if we have any extra spots, the people in the 6150 building do not have any inside parking, and they would love some of that. So it's like right across the street, some of the people could park there. So I think as now we can use all the space, and eventually, which I would love to see too, people all taking the bus. If this is ground level, then possibly we can convert some of that spaces to, I don't know, Kathleen, we were talking about putting retail in and small shops, and I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the thing that seems maybe is heretical, but it seems like the number of units is sacrosanct. I'm not sure why we need to be arguing against the ratio. Maybe the problem is there's just too many units. And if you kept the ratio the same and reduced the units down, it would solve the same problem.
We could do
keep the
that.
parking the way you want it, but it would keep the height of the building at a more reasonable level. But you seem to not at all. You set on the number of units you have. And I've not heard any discussion about maybe that's too many units. Relates back to the traffic issue about how many units you're going to be pumping traffic into the street from and all. And maybe that's discussion needs to go there.
Well, we're looking at that. So if you go 4 floors of apartments, that's 88, and then 100 parking spots. That would make your 5 stories. And so Kathleen has done a study where she shows what it looks like if we switch to 5-story buildings, and it covers the entire site. It's kind of what and I don't mean to be rude, it's like what we're seeing in Middleton a lot is like it's edge to edge development. And I mean, that's a possibility, but we just thought because we're right next to the Conservancy, it would be wonderful if we could have a spot for like farmers markets and parking for the Conservancy and food carts, and invite the neighborhood in, because if we don't have any green spot there's really no reason at all for any of the people in these 3 buildings to have any communication or contact with each other. If we have a place where people, the marina people and, people coming into the Conservancy or whatever can meet there in that spot, now we have a neighborhood. So our idea would be to make this more conducive to have, interaction between people and have a neighborhood was the reason. We have a picture of what the 5-story looks like. And the reason we're asking, like not reducing the units is because we're not asking for higher density. We're asking for, to push it all in one spot. So more condensed density. But if we look at the density of our neighbors in some of the other buildings that are going on, that's about the density we're looking at, putting up a total of 317
My colleague
units.
from District 6 talked about 6 stories. What about, have you looked at that? Is it?
Okay, so we're looking at 6. So if you look at 6, you got 5 stories of, you got 80, so you got 110 units because you'd have your 5 stories with 100 parking spots. So that those ratios don't work in this configuration that we're looking at. We kind of,
And you might expand the floor space a little bit, but not as much as if you did it, if you had it reduced to 5 story.
I think 1 story of parking under 5, your ratios aren't going to work. I mean, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not
you
trying
can
to
do
solve
that.
your problem. I'm just
Yeah.
raising these issues as something to think about, that I think there are a number of options that you seem to have come wedded to the plan, and now we're finding problems with the plan, or some of us are. And so it's a matter of now looking creatively as to what are some other options. I guess that's all I'm trying to do, is throw out some other thoughts.
Yeah, we've actually thought about this a lot, so I appreciate that, because I mean, we've been working on this for 2 years, and it is a problem. So let's see.
I'm going to have you pause for a moment. Staff would like to.
Well, if I can try and help, I sort of see, I think we're talking, I think I'm hearing people talking past each other. So if I may ask a question that Commissioner Schaefer is asking a different way. Sue,
I'm sorry.
so the question he's asking is why can't you just reduce the number of units? What happens if you reduce the number of units and keep the same footprint? I think that's a question that you're asking. Instead of, your response was, well, in order to make this work from a number standpoint, you'd want to have a bigger footprint and spread out more. But what if you just reduced the number of units and brought it down to 5 stories, and kept the number of units and had one level, or kept the number of units per floor, and then just had one parking level? What, if you could answer that question specifically, and I suspect that has to do with financial numbers of construction of the building and all that, but that might be where he was going with that. Is that correct?
It
John?
has to do with the ratios of parking to units.
I understand.
Okay.
I get that.
But we are taking down existing buildings. So we've got additional costs. They're not building on raw land. So we're taking down income producing buildings that we have to pay for the demolition costs. We're not in the TIF district. We're doing this on our own. We're putting up expensive buildings. And if we start talking about reducing number of units, it doesn't make as much sense financially.
No, but it's not the city's job, and it's not the government's job to necessarily ensure that you make a profit off of this thing. I mean, you're looking to do something, and I want you to be successful and have a profit, but that doesn't mean that we're supposed to then bend all of our rules just to make sure that your profit comes out the way you want.
No, of course not. But I think you do have an interest that your developers are
No, I think
profitable.
that's what
Of course.
why I'm
Okay,
looking for compromise.
Thank
I'm
you.
done.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Erdman. Haynes?
It sounds like my fellow commissioners have their mindset, but I have a deeply opposing counterpoint to many of these comments. And so open up your minds for a moment, because I see this as the perfect spot for a planned development district to be outside of the norms of our zoning. I think this is the perfect spot to consider an alternative. Because if you look at what they're trying to achieve, it's to reduce surface parking in order to enhance the health of the conservancy by reducing runoff. Okay, that's a goal that everybody in the community benefits from, not just the immediate neighbors, not just this piece of land. If you look at what's surrounding this, why would we need to have a 5-story cap on this? When you're driving down Allen Boulevard to the north, you would see this building, but right now what you see is just some 2-story buildings that don't have much appeal. To the west is CVS. CVS isn't looking at these buildings. I mean, there's just a big intersection here. It's not in the way of anyone's view to the lake. It's not in the way of anyone's view to the conservancy. it's not in anyone's way. So why are we concerned about the 7 stories? Even the shadow is not bothering any other property. So I think if we want to enhance density and bring it away from the conservancy and put the most number of people near the one of the very few places in Middleton that has services and it has a bus line, this is where you do it. And it's amazing that the property owners want to do this. And I mean, I'm not going to go through a cost benefit analysis and determine for them what makes business sense. I think they've done that. They've spent money, they've hired an architect, and they've come up with a plan, and they've considered the environment while doing so. I mean, this is the one area in town. It has a vet clinic. It has a laundromat. It has Subway. It has McDonald's. It has a Mexican grocer. It has a hardware store. It has a CVS. It's like the only place in Middleton you could actually be somewhat pedestrian friendly, and it's on a bus line. I mean, it's the perfect spot to put a bunch of people. If we're trying to achieve more people using public transportation and being on foot, this is the one place we could do it. There's like not a lot of land around here to do that on because the conservancy is behind it and everything else is built up. So where else are we going to achieve what we could achieve on this site? And I just want people to consider that, because now as the mother's perspective, I've looked into how long does it take to take an infant to a medical appointment because we have no clinic in Middleton. It takes an hour and a half on a bus. What mother with an infant is going to spend an hour and a half just getting to the clinic? By the time she's there, the diaper's wet, the baby needs to eat, she's completely stressed. Now she still has to go through the shots, the whole exam, and an hour and a half back home, her day's completely gone. Like, you need 1-to-1 ratio, at least. Everybody needs to be able to have a car in Middleton. It's just what it is. It's just what it is. And I don't have a problem with this like project in any way. I think it's very thoughtful, and I would just like people to consider this completely alternative universe I'm suggesting at this location.
Thank you for those comments, and thank you for stretching us. Sometimes we need to step back and look at that. And I do want to let the folks know who don't know me so well. This is my district that I ran in, that I served in for the last 5 years. And you guys are right. There are walking everything there. As for the traffic, it is hard. It is something I continue to monitor and I've pledged to work on, as I will across the city. But I can tell you, it's tough now. Adding this apartment isn't going to make it better, but I think they get 20,000 cars on Century. And so that the problem we had with the Captain Bill's is it is a volume of cars. However, on Allen, we get so many cars that it's a drop in the bucket. So I hear you. Definitely need the parking because I am a mom. I was that mom taking my kids to appointments, but I'm off topic. So Alder Hanaro.
I just want to thank you for your comments. And I personally, I don't have a concern about the 7 stories. I recognize it would be precedent setting, but that precedent will be set somewhere. And this is as good a place to set it as any. I am concerned about the traffic at that intersection, but as you said, Mayor, it's already tricky. I know it's on the list of things to fix. And I trust that our public works folks in the county will be able to come up with something that will improve that intersection, not just for cars, but for the pedestrians and the bike riders who, like me, avoid that intersection at all costs and cross Allen without any signal because it's actually safer to do that. I did have some questions that I'd like to ask the developer and the architect, and that is the timbers. I'm losing my note. Middleton would love to be the place where we have the first mass composite building in the Madison area. So why did that concept go away?
I think when we were talking with ownership, I think they just wanted to be clear that when this project does kick off, because we've seen such a wide range in commodities, they just wanted to be transparent that if a shift needed to occur in order to execute the project, then they needed to be able to look at that and wanted to just be forthcoming with that. I think overall, in our working relationship, they're dedicated to sustainability, and it's definitely still something that we would hope for. And I think the backup was that if at the time phase one went ahead, if it just wasn't feasible, we would go with wood frame construction on phase one, and then really focus in on mass timber on phase two when we have more time to plan for it. But again, it's just to be transparent and to just make sure that there's some flexibility so that they can move forward.
I'm very pleased to hear about the commitment to sustainability. That's my thing. So question for staff. On page 21 of the packet, it says city engineering staff have not yet determined whether a utility study will be necessary, but at this time they have no reason to believe that the water and sanitary sewer mains running past the site can accommodate the increased number of dwelling units. So who has the responsibility of confirming that water and sanitary sewer mains can accommodate the increase?
David Sarbacher, our utility, sewer and water utility director. I spoke with him and got that confirmation from him that he's not concerned about it. That's where that quote came from.
Okay. And then a question for the owner on page 17, it talks about minimizing the displacement of the existing residents. How many tenants have opted to move into one of the existing buildings? And how will their rents compare if they make that move? Because I watched I wasn't at the last meeting and I wasn't at the public hearing, but I did watch it. And I heard the comments about trying to accommodate the folks whose building is going to be torn down.
Yeah, that'd be my department. I'm Anna. I'm Sue's daughter and one of the developers. So I think we asked everybody in the building at this point. Yeah, I'm the assistant property manager there too. So I think we've approached, I think it's been everybody in the building at this point to see if they wanted to move to one of our other existing buildings. So the 6130, 10 and 20 building is what we call them. So the other buildings that were built in the 60s, or the 6150 building, the newer building, most of them opted not to move. Surprisingly, we lowered their rent in the 6140 building, lower than everybody else to help with moving costs. And then we've given them slightly shorter leases this year in order to accommodate for our new building. But we're toying with, and I guess we haven't gone over this thoroughly, giving them a break at the very last month so they have money for a deposit to move. But we've moved everybody that's wanted to so far.
Okay. And then I do have other questions, but I think the things that would be more appropriate during the SIP phase, things like bird-friendly design, which I know is one of the comments that you all had heard. And if we get to the point of taking action on this, I have some suggestions and questions about the bullets for the
Staff
conditions.
recommendation.
Okay. So in hearing everyone,
I'd like to just comment,
Thank you.
respond. I think, Gretchen, you're absolutely right. This is where we want to put our housing units. And I'm not particularly as concerned about the traffic issues. I mean, the pedestrian traffic flow at that intersection is difficult. I understood from looking at the report that that's going to be part of the rework of that Century Avenue. I'm comfortable with that part of it. And the issue isn't the issue for me. For me, it's the 2 levels of additional bonus height, which is a 40% increase. And the fact that we have 2 levels of parking, which I feel are more than is necessary, we're providing more parking that's necessary. And that those 2 levels are what the pedestrians are going to be interacting with. People in that neighborhood are going to be interacting with the parking garage, not with people out on their porch, not people coming out of their unit. People aren't going to be going out from the first floor out to the sidewalk and walking up and down the street. Those are the issues those are the problems that I have. So, I'm all for redevelopment of the site. I'm all for density at the site. If we're gonna give bonus jumps of 40%, then we're gonna need to be able to do that everywhere, or for other comparable projects. So I think there has to be a benefit to that, to the public, to award that. For me, the open space, I've been trying to figure out, okay, the open space and health of the conservancy, absolutely, it's important. But we also have all the neighbors that are impacted by this building and the people that are driving up and down the building, or pedestrians using the street that are impacted by it, that I'm not sure what their feeling would be. Would their trade-off, would they rather have more units behind and lower height up front? Perhaps, I don't know. I also think about the project that is now at the Captain Bill site, was originally proposed at, I think, 7 stories and ended up being approved at 4 or 5.
5, I believe it was.
Yeah. This is kind of this, I mean, we're in the same neighborhood, we're across the street. So if we're going to use that standard, I wasn't part of that approval process, but it seems like the commission came to that analysis there. Why is this site so much different? So I'm grappling with that.
If I could comment, just because I was in those discussions, part of the Captain Bill issue was that there was a whole series of houses and things behind that structure for which the lake was then being blocked by that. And so that started to go up the hill and had a lot of 2- and 3-story buildings for which that was a visual intrusion to the space. Plus it was concerned that the space couldn't even support the 7 or 8 stories. So that was a slightly different issue. I understand what Lisa's saying, but there's just the conservancy behind it. So it's not really, it only becomes an eyesore for somebody in the conservancy who looks and sees this giant. It's like being in the Central Park or something. Yeah, but that was a little clarification on that issue.
Can I ask city for clarification? When we're talking about rezoning a PDD, this doesn't set a precedent for other PDD projects, right? We are looking at this site, the specifics. This doesn't set a precedent for general rezoning or other PDDs, right?
Yeah, I can try to answer that. I would say that the city has discretion under state law to approve or deny a rezoning request based on pretty much any factor that you can think of. That's what state law allows. The city is not under any obligation to approve any rezoning requests, and that even includes the comprehensive plan future land use map. Even if a rezoning is consistent with that land use map, the city is not obligated under state law to approve a rezoning request. State law does require that our ordinances are consistent with our comprehensive plan, but they do not require individual zoning decisions to be consistent. So legally speaking, I would say that there would be no precedent that would be set by allowing a rezoning to a 7-story here, just like the rezoning that was approved for 3 8-story buildings on Pleasant View Road does not set a precedent under the law. I would also say that you will hear from developers who will come in and propose 7-story buildings and use this as their precedent. So legally, no, but in the eyes of the development community, possibly.
If I can add a little nuance, if you don't mind, Abby. We have the power of zoning to decide what gets zoned, what property gets zoned, as Abby was mentioning. So we don't have to establish zoning districts that would allow a 5-story or a 7-story with a conditional use all over the city. So I guess I would answer it a little bit differently, with all due respect to my colleague, that we can use our zoning code revision project that we are that you will be seeing in the next few weeks. The zoning maps that comes out of that process is not going to allow a 5-story or, high density residential in most parts of the city. So I would say that, in this case, for the reasons that Gretchen, that you mentioned and others, we, from a staff standpoint, see a lot of merit in having higher density in an area that has a lot of services. But that doesn't mean that this would be suitable, along other corridors or other locations that aren't proximate to those services. So in that sense, I think the city does have a lot of ability to control what is a precedent and what isn't. Sure, people are going to cite an example. I mean, we could look at places in Madison and say they have 7 and 10-story buildings on East Washington or at Hilldale, and those are 4-lane or 6-lane roads and good transit service. I mean, we can point to that, and I think we should, because we can see what's working elsewhere and we can learn from those examples. But that doesn't mean it's going to be done everywhere for the reasons that Abby stated. Council members ultimately have that authority.
Thank you. Before I call on you, Alder Schaefer, I just want to step back to what Commissioner Bruce was saying about the 2 floors of parking. And can staff share some insights on the water table issues? And I'm just thinking, because being focused on sustainability, if we are telling them no more 7-story buildings, we want 5, let's just say, and they put the 2 stories below, and yet they have to run some pumps all the time, we're then causing a new problem, right? So and that's part of the piece I was thinking about. Do I want 4 or 5 stories? Yeah, sure. That's what we're doing, right? On the side of the Beltline. But the water table is where it catches me. And I think I'm reflecting on what Commissioner Erdman-Heims was saying, on the fact that it's next to a CVS, it's next to a McDonald's, it's across from Harbor. There is one neighborhood to the right, but that's not the next building over. That's down the road. But really, for right now, this is a place that is not impacting housing around it, and it has a water issue. So can staff talk a little bit about that, about if they were to submerge the parking underground?
I'm unable to get into details about that. I know it's possible to dewater a site, and society can build a channel between the UK and France. So I mean,
Fair.
anything can be done at a cost.
Fair.
But I don't know. And I used to live in downtown Middleton, and we had a flood, and the pump ran out and we had flooding. So I mean, I know that things happen when you go below a water table, but that's the extent of my
All right.
ability to respond.
I appreciate that. Alder Schaefer?
Yeah, I'm hearing a contradiction here though, too. In the plan keeps talking about this is a wonderful location because they're going to build us mass transit and the new public transportation's coming in, and we can avoid all of these cars. And at the same time, we're talking about putting more cars than we've put in any development since I've been in my 3 or 4 years on the plan commission. And so that seems a contradiction in terms. I think you could come down to a 1-to-1 ratio, and that would be no different than every other apartment building in the city. And it would also value the idea that we still want to encourage people who can, not the mothers with babies, but the other people, to take that bus when it comes by and do something. So that's just a contradiction. But I think I'd like to make a motion, because if I understand, if we approve this first motion, it doesn't approve the 7 stories. It just approves the concept. And if I read my commissioners correctly, I think we're 100% behind the idea that this is a great spot to do something. And making it a PDD deals with the density, but it doesn't necessarily approve the 7 stories.
Sure.
But it does, we are setting we're setting the bulk of the building.
Yeah.
So, and that to me means footprint and height. So.
Well, but the footprint can change. I mean, we're not even at an SIP or GIP stage yet. So
but we are going to approve the GIP. This is what happens.
I thought we were just
Do I
approving
have
the
a second?
Pardon?
Do I have a second?
Did you make a motion?
Yes.
I was going to make a motion that we approve
That's what I heard.
yeah. That's
Thank
right.
you. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay. All those in favor, please. Oh,
I'm sorry.
discussion. I'm supposed to say that.
Yeah.
We had a
You should
long
ask about
discussion.
But also for clarification, it's helpful to know for the minutes what the motion exactly is. Is this a motion as indicated on the screen, or is this a motion? What is?
No,
what
well,
is
the
that?
motion had a lot of other stuff in it, verbiage that I did not like that would enable it to be a 7-story structure. I think the motion is simply to approve the rezoning
So Commissioner,
in preparation for what will be
With the
future
con-
development.
With the conditions that just disappeared from the screen.
The screen itself keeps
Coming
disappearing
back.
constantly.
yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right.
It should be on your screen now. So if I may, Mayor Kuhn, Commissioner Bruce, I think is right that the GIP does define this, the overall density.
Yeah, the
and
density.
number. The reason why we have the 7 stories as a separate conditional use process is because the comprehensive plan specifically has a definition that says it should be done by conditional use. The 7 stories is still embedded in the GIP. I think is so it's just to say you're approving the rezoning and as
Yeah, I guess that's not how I understood the original.
I
Back on the
understand.
agenda as it's listed on the agenda.
I can see why it's confusing.
Yeah.
We have the CUP process there just to protect to cover our bases, to make sure that there isn't a legal obstacle in the future that we didn't follow our proper procedures. So
With
Well, I'm gonna
that,
pull back my
are
motion
you-
until I understand.
thank you. Are you withdrawing
I'm withdrawing, yes.
your motion? All right, so we had a second. Do you want to change your motion or also
There's
withdraw?
nothing to second anymore, so.
Would you like to make a motion? Would anyone like to make a motion?
Mayor Kuhn?
I'll make a motion to refer this proposal to the next meeting for the applicant to work with staff to try to better mitigate the height of the building so that it would not necessarily be 7 stories straight up, and to help activate the street frontage with living units. If we can get that done. So that's my motion.
Do I have a second?
Harple second.
All those in favor say,
you want discussion?
oh, I'm sorry, discussion.
I just have one side comment. I love the idea of having more interaction with the pedestrians. And I love the uses that were suggested in terms of like a dog facility and I don't remember what else was suggested, but they were things we typically don't see. We usually see like a tax preparer and a nail salon and a coffee shop. How many of those do we need? But the living units, I think that's a little bit of a tough sell on the ground floor on the street face of Century
Because of the
Avenue.
traffic.
I don't know that those would be very popular. So my husband is Belgian, and when we go there, like, it's always the first floor units. Nobody wants those because nobody wants people looking in their living room. So I like the idea of these sort of interactive spaces, but I don't think most people are going to want to rent units that are right on Century Avenue at the first floor. It's intrusive.
Alder Henry.
I wonder if Commissioner Bruce would be willing to look at, here's where we need the numbers instead of the bullets. I suggested to staff that in the future, the conditions all have numbers, so it's easier to refer to them.
That's a good
But I'm
idea.
looking at the one that says the SAP, it's in like brownish type. The SAP shall incorporate various facade articulation techniques. So further down, it says the developer is highly encouraged to allocate first level space. Can we require that the first level space be put to building uses that interact with people? And I agree with my colleague that I don't see people wanting to be interacted with in their homes at ground level.
I even wonder, could the interactive aspect still have parking behind it because you need to do your, you need to store your equipment and whatnot, but could it be, a large porch area with ping pong tables and bocce ball or something, like some kind of interactive space? Maybe that's even where
Am
the
I
dog
allowed
run
to,
is.
am I allowed to respond at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. A lot to respond to, but I guess first off, this team has really tried to be proactive in meeting with staff and to work through these things. So it is a little bit disheartening to contemplate another postponement. We've been working really hard. And we have the understanding that those types of level of design can happen at SIP, and we're very committed to doing it. We agree wholeheartedly that we can move some of these amenity spaces that are in high demand for these properties down to Century Avenue. I think it's a great idea. Most of our projects would go down into the ground when we don't have water table or soil issues. A majority of ours do, so we understand. We've also, if we look at the elevations or the renderings, I should say, if they can come up, we've taken great care at a very early stage to pull some very expensive materials down into those first 2 floors, so that even where we aren't penetrating, we're offering light levels and glass and things like that to counter the fact that we can't go down into the ground. So I think at the SIP level, we are poised and ready to develop that further, because it's our understanding that's the point at which that can start to happen, with Mark and his team seeing that and reviewing it and working through it.
If I could just comment, I mean, I love and appreciate the staff, and they're great. And I know you worked with the staff, but the staff are also working with us, and that's part of the process. So if it'd be a lot easier for everybody if you just simply worked with staff and then it was all done, but that's not how it works.
No, but they always bring your voice to the table,
Right.
And we appreciate that. I mean, as designers, it's great to collaborate with all of you, and it makes our projects better. So it's always very helpful. And I think Mark has represented your concerns throughout the process.
All right, so we have a motion in front of us. Were you going to say something, Alder Hanara?
Well, I was thinking about making a substitute motion.
Okay.
And if I may, before you do that, I took what I heard, Commissioner, was it Bruce who made the motion? Yeah. I took essentially what I heard and was going to suggest this language. Is this what you had in mind? Just so we have it for the record before a substitute is made. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just wanted to clear the make sure that we had that motion captured before we went on to another one.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Thank you.
Alder Hanara?
Well, I guess I'm going to make a motion. It can be seconded or not. I'm going to make a motion that we the Common Council approve an ordinance rezoning the property to PDD GIP, and to recommend the council approve the GIP with the following contingencies as shown on the screen. Changing the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 7th one to say promote a visual connection to the 2 street frontages.
Oh, no.
Comma, allocating first level space to building uses that interact with people, and continue to the end.
So striking the words, the developer is highly encouraged to.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
I will second that motion.
Discussion.
Oh, sorry, discussion?
And so
Hearing.
just for the record, this would be a substitute motion is how you're handling this. Alder Hanaro is what you called it. And just
Yes,
to help everyone understand if they don't, so a substitute motion takes precedence over the motion that was made, as I understand it. So, okay, I just wanted to. So in other words, if this is voted on, then you don't end up voting on the other motion that was made. Just
Okay.
to clarify,
if this is approved.
this takes precedence,
Yeah.
and if it's defeated, then you're back to the previous motion.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification.
Can I ask another question? Is there any, in your substitute motion, is there any other changes to the bulk of the building in terms of step backs at the upper level or other techniques that might mitigate the height of the building?
Is that an SIP question, staff?
I
Or
mean,
is
those are,
that a?
if you wanted to,
May I respond?
yeah, sure, I'm sorry. I
So
thought you
here's
asked
the
me.
thing, as I understand it, this will approve going up to 5 stories. correct? It's the conditional
That's
use
mine.
permit that's next. That's the more,
See, that's the part I don't understand. I think this approves the PDD GIP. And in that, we're approving 7 stories and this number of units and this kind of this footprint.
I would agree with that. And the reason, again, why we had the conditional use as a separate process is because of specific language in the comprehensive plan that identified conditional use with a shall statement.
Yeah, see, that was when I originally was trying to just
Yeah.
move the rezoning without
Right.
approving the GIP in the process.
But we don't know what we're left with. If you don't approve a 7-story, then what are you left with? What are you approving tonight is the conundrum.
The rezoning.
Yeah, but the rezoning is to Plan Development District GIP, and the GIP calls for a 7-story building.
Okay.
I'm just,
I appreciate it.
if-
I do appreciate it.
if it would smooth the way for passage to take out the second part recommending the council approve the GIP. What is that?
what's the purpose of that, Alder Hanero?
Well, because going back to Alder Schaefer's original motion that he withdrew
Yeah.
based on the agenda itself, the agenda doesn't include the second part and to recommend that council approve the general implementation plan.
Yeah. See, it raises the whole question of why there was a second item on the agenda that specifically deals with the 7 stories, if it's not inferred that it's automatic in the first one.
We tried to address that in the hearing notice, and I think it's quite clear. It wouldn't hurt. I mean, you're not on agenda item 2, but it's obviously related. Because the comprehensive plan includes heights not to exceed 5 stories except by conditional use. That was part of the definition of the future land use category of multifamily residential. And so I just didn't, the reason why we and I, as zoning administrator, asked them to go through this process was because I didn't want somebody then to say, well, you didn't follow your comprehensive plan that's adopted by ordinance by not requiring the conditional use process. So it was basically dotting i's and crossing t's. Do you have another way to say that?
Just one more thing to add is that the comprehensive plan set us up to update our zoning ordinance to create a classification for a 5-story building that could go up to 7 stories or could go above 5 stories by conditional use.
Okay.
We haven't finalized the zoning ordinance. We haven't implemented that section of the comprehensive plan. So now we're trying to retrofit the intent of that using a plan development district. And that's why we consulted with our city attorney about the conditional use and whether that would be required as well. The way that I would look at the conditional use at this point is that it's kind of dotting the i's and crossing the t's, but I would think that the actual meat of the rezoning and what would enable the 7-story building would be in the GIP.
Right.
I do have on my screen here, if you would like for me to share it, I have the zoning ordinance pulled up and it shows what the GDP or GIP is intended to convey. Let me see here if I can just quickly share. So what would typically be included in a GIP zoning would be a general layout of roadways, driveways, and parking facilities. And I would take that a step further to say, you know, if the plan commission has a proposal for a building that includes 200 parking stalls and you do not want to approve a building that includes 200 parking stalls, I would be very specific in any GIP approval that you are not conveying approval of that. The GIP also conveys approval of land uses and size, including height, arrangement and location of lots and proposed buildings, type, size, and location of structures, a general utility plan, recreation and open space areas, a general landscape plan. And that's kind of the extent of it.
Unless you explicitly exclude some of those as part of the.
Or you
Approval.
create a contingency of approval that requires the initial GIP to be altered in some specific way.
Such as the height of the building or the number of parking spots. Well,
That Mark and or Abby staff, just as a side, the proposed zoning ordinance is going to allow exceptions to the height or increases to the height, I think, from 5 stories. But are there requirements to get that additional height, or are there?
Like step backs and things like that.
Correct, yeah.
We have, and you've been a member of the work group that's been, we had a few meetings with you as the Plan Commission representative. There is some language in there regarding step backs. It's still in draft form. Still something that this commission, in fact, we're hoping in 2 weeks even to start bringing these concepts to you. So there are zoning districts that are being defined with certain heights that have some standards for how that height can be achieved, to answer your question. But we haven't specifically said, this property, we haven't taken that specifically to individual properties. We have general concepts of what we want to do with zoning districts, and we kind of know where they would go, where we would propose them to go, I should say.
Yeah.
But we haven't, I haven't taken that zoning text and specifically compared it with this proposal per se. But we did ask the developer if they were amenable, and they are, to have this be a temporary PDD, and then whatever zoning gets assigned to them it'll be a conforming use, if that makes sense. So we will have a zoning classification that will allow whatever gets approved here on that site. We were going to make sure that that zoning district has that standard, but that doesn't, so it'd be a multifamily high density residential, but that's going to be very limited with where that gets placed around the city. It would probably only get placed in this area, to be honest, other than west of the Beltline, maybe.
Okay, I'm going to call on
So-
Abby and then I want to move on.
I was just going to say to Commissioner Bruce's earlier question about step backs, I do think that a step back, that is something that could be added as a contingency if that's something that the commission was interested in seeing.
Is that a yes?
But I mean, from my perspective, we're giving additional height above and beyond what the land use plan called for.
Mhm.
So if we're going to do that, I think then we ought to make sure that and we know that the public that's been here in front of us has been concerned about the height. So I think one very logical thing for us to do would be to require a step back on the upper level or upper 2 levels that would be consistent with our thoughts on other multifamily districts that are going to be coming forward in the future.
So that's a yes for contingency request?
I would certainly support that, because I think it's the massing is against the street and it's pushed and you got 7 stories straight up.
Okay.
And what's behind it is conservancy, as you said, is less relevant to the view issues. It's more that.
Thank you for sharing both comments. Did you want to?
I just wanted some clarity if you're talking about that as a requirement at this level or at the SIP level. And then my mind automatically goes to the impact of the fact that those units all get smaller. So
Or there's a reduction in the number of units. That's another way of doing it.
proportionally, it doesn't quite work that cleanly. I mean, we end up with, it's just not that clean. But because we have to stack units because of plumbing and so forth, it just, so I just wanted clarity over what stage are we looking at that? Because this is kind of coming in late in the game for us to consider, and we're kind of doing it on the fly when there is, implications to it. So I just wanted clarity on that.
Thank you for that. Staff, is that generally an SIP request? Or is that a G?
We talk about the step back height alteration.
And there's a level to what degree, because usually that's defined, is it 2 feet, is it 5 feet?
Or
And we could ask as part of the we could add it as you could work with staff on what that setback would look like. We don't have to define everything, but I think we could say consider it for moving forward. And I understand that y'all don't want them just working with staff. However, we are bringing this up, so.
I would also like to know how many commissioners need this as a requirement.
Yeah, that's a
fair.
good question.
Totally fair.
Heard
Yep.
two that have said no, but we haven't heard from Aaron at all.
I'm more concerned with the first floor, the pedestrian interaction and
Yeah.
possibility of retail storefront, to be honest. I think when you're going that high, that small of a step back is not going to make that large of an impact for the view of the project.
May I ask, is the change to the long paragraph in bullet number 7, I think, allocating first level space to building uses, does that address your concern, or did you have something else in mind?
The number
It's the
7,
It's the big one.
bullet 7.
So
With
it
your-
isn't, it's not changed on here, but it will say,
With your correction.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just so I understand, is that across the entire street frontage? Or what is the requirement there?
Allocating first level space to building uses that interact with people traveling along the adjacent path, and that is in reference to the 2 street frontages.
Okay. But they could still have parking behind that interactive space.
We essentially lose one whole row of double loaded. It leads us to a single loaded condition is the way that it times out.
Which is what, about 30 spaces or 25 spaces? Yeah, which helps reduce the parking. I mean, I knew that
We
when,
were open to.
yeah, that's why I hemmed and hawed at the beginning when you said how many spaces, because, and that's why I said it would be an SIP question, because I knew that you have 3 bays of parking, right? There's 60 feet. So that's 180 feet. So 60 feet is enough. So you'd have 60 feet of depth to work with these other uses. And the ramp that serves the second level, it's in the middle there, comes in from, that's the upper floor. So you come in and you would be immediately going up. If you lost this first floor, the bay at the bottom where it says 6 accessible spaces, and put those accessible ADA spaces. I like to say ADA spaces. If you put those elsewhere, there's other places to put them. That would be easier to convert than it would be the upper level, because the upper level is where the ramp comes up if it kept this configuration. So the staff recommendation was recognizing that this entire bay on the ground level might be converted to other space, maintenance, fitness, bikes, but that was going to be determined at the SIP stage. That was why we wrote it that way. But I think the language that Alder Hanairo is suggesting, that it's not just encourage, I think that is entirely, I debated including it that way as the recommendation. So I think that's entirely appropriate, and that accomplishes the objective of activating the street level space.
There's common use facilities there that are occupied by people,
Right.
or
Yeah.
and it wouldn't necessarily be trash room or a
Right.
recycling room or a maintenance room.
The new zoning code, for example, has a threshold of either 33 or 50% on, it's going to propose that on certain mixed use buildings, that there be a certain percentage of that ground floor space be activated.
Yeah.
And along the lines of what you're describing. We're simply applying that here with this motion. If this is what-
Okay, great. So I want to move forward to the vote. And I appreciate all this back and forth and discussion. The motion in front of us is to approve with changes, with staff suggested changes and a change in language. Is that accurate?
What was the staff suggested change?
Page 2, contingencies.
It wasn't our suggested, what, it was Alder Hanairo.
It's everything
there.
on this
Yeah.
screen that's showing right now.
Yeah,
With the change to say the 2 street frontages, comma, allocating first level space. So it's
Alright.
taking out the encourage part and making it a shall.
it's basically eliminating, oops, sorry. These words, right?
Yes.
Oh, well,
And
you
changing
get the
it to
idea.
allocating.
Okay, very good. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No. Those.
And motion passes.
It's one.
Thank you. Moving on. The next item is the conditional use permit or CUP to allow building height to exceed 5 stories. Middleton Shores redevelopment, 6140 Century Avenue. Do I have a motion?
And Daphne's pulling up another motion that was not in your packet, but as Abby and I were talking about this today, and here we go, there, no, yeah, this one. So if the first motion passed on the first item, we would recommend this motion that's on your screen now for the second agenda item. Hopefully the screen stays constant. Otherwise, the paper idea would have been good.
Okay, I will ask again. Is there a motion?
Oops.
Bergman Hermans.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. This is Hanira.
Thank you. All those in favor, please. Oh, sorry. So much discussion, I forgot. Any discussion on this new motion, making it consistent with the city's comprehensive plan? Any discussion or questions? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Bruce opposes.
Thank you. The motion passes. All right, so next item is the sign design review of the Middleton High School Athletic Stadium at 2415 Bristol Street. Staff, do you have any comments?
Yes, so they submitted a bunch of signs, and the only signs that we really need to review are the ones shown on the top right of the screen. So there's the big Cardinal sign, the one at the very top, Borden Athletic Complex, and then there's one over in this corner for the ticket booth. And so these are the only signs that are facing the street. Because we do have in our sign ordinance, basically for athletic complexes, any signage, facing interior, specifically for spectators, that doesn't require any design review or sign permits. But these 3 signs are facing towards the parking lot, which is considered the street frontage. So these signs would have to comply with our sign ordinance. We do realize that this big Cardinal sign, it's about 460 square feet, I think, was the sign that size. And it is, more, graphic or design oriented. It's not really, promoting anything like a business. But we did want it to kind of be, more considered like a mural. And in that case, we would want it to be non-illuminated, perhaps add some additional graphics like, like a faded picture of like a football player in the sea or something, just add some additional graphics to make it more like an art mural instead of a sign. Or they would have to bring, shrink the entire thing down to 100 square feet, which is the largest size allowed by our sign ordinance.
Okay, with that, do I have?
I had a question. Could you point out again which of the signs? So the Cardinal D3.
Yeah, so it's Cardinals, and then there's one over here. Sorry, let me move. It says tickets. It's black on black,
Yeah,
so it's hard to see. And then the one up here, Borden Athletic Complex.
So only the ones on the right side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Are you asking for the letters to pop more? Is that?
Well, that was going to be, I'll make a motion to approve sign 1 contingent upon, no, let me rephrase that. I will recommend approval of signs 2 and 3 and approval of sign 1 contingent upon staff review of limiting the size to 100 square feet or requiring the removal of the internal lighting and adding graphics. So the signage is considered a mural instead.
I'll second that motion.
Is there, excuse me, can
Yeah.
people hear me?
Chris
good.
Michaud from E is on the call.
Oh, good, because I did have some questions, Madam Mayor. If we're in the
Fantastic.
discussion phase.
Yes, I was going to say, any discussion? And-
Okay,
Um,
so and who is on the line? I didn't catch. the
Yeah, I was
name.
gonna say-
Chris Mish.
Hi. Yeah, hi, my name's Chris Michaud. I'm with Epstein Ewan Architects. We're the firm that's been working with the district on this project as well as the high school project.
Okay, great. Thank you for being here. So I had a question about well, Daphne was pointing out where it says tickets. And actually, this is the case on a sign that we don't need to approve, but I wondered the same thing, and that is the dark text, the dark lettering on a dark background going to be readable by most people? You know, black on dark gray doesn't.
It's actually, it's a product of the PDF file. If you zoom into that, it might show differently, but those letters will be a clear anodized aluminum color. So it'll be like a bright aluminum that will stand off against the dark masonry that's there. I think it's just yeah, it's even hard to see here, but you can see the finish color there under the specification for the sign is called out as clear anodized. So that's like a aluminum color.
Okay.
It's just not showing up that way in the graphic here because the lines are too close together.
And it's probably an artifact of the PDF that Borden Athletic Complex is so squeezed.
Yeah, well, if you move over to look at that, we actually have that surface of the building is at an angle, so you might be viewing it in oblique. If you go up to this and then move over to the side. Sorry, I'm usually panning around the screen. This is more appropriately spaced out. It's not as condensed as what the other one looks like.
Got it.
So this is if you're perpendicular to the surface.
I guess my only concern, when I look at the big word Cardinals, I don't see a sign. I see it as an architectural kind of feature and function. You know, it's not because you're not going to the Cardinals. Cardinals happen to be somebody in there. So it, to me, is less a sign and more an art. So I'm not concerned with that particular. The other two are fine.
And if I could make a case, I would like to talk about that large cardinal sign. Because technically it is a sign, right? But I agree with you. It's part of the school brand and the school identity. And when we first did renderings and images for this project, that impact that Cardinals had is one of the main reasons why they've gotten such great support. This is not a taxpayer funded project. This is a partnership between the district and private donors that have raised all the money for this project. And I would really be disappointed to see that sign go away. And from what I hear from the group is we could maintain it as it is if it took on a little bit more of a graphic impact and it removed the lighting aspect of it. And before I would just like to clarify the intent of the lighting just in case there are misunderstandings on it. So if you could zoom into the Cardinal sign for me, that would be great. I know these things are not always easy to navigate around. And I apologize for not being there. I had a home conflict here. I wasn't able to get out to Middleton today after Milwaukee.
It's no concern. You're on by Zoom.
So when we talk about an illuminated sign for this one, I just want to make sure everyone understands that the red surface of the sign is not going to be illuminated. That will be a solid painted piece of metal. All right. And the lighting would be behind that. And you would only have a little bit of edge glow, which bleeds out from around the edges of the letters. And the reason to do that is just to do some contrast on the letters from the background that it's on. A lot of times when you see signage on like a retail storefront or something like that, the letters are face lit. So the faces of the letters glow, or they have lighting mounted on the building that shines onto the sign. And we didn't want to mount fixtures on the building to wash this with light. And we didn't want the faces of the letters to glow because we thought that would be too much. You know, it's right there in your face. But doing a behind the sign edge glow, we thought was a real tasteful way to allow that contrast to work. And we would love it. I mean, even if we said, I think right now we have the letters called out at about 54 inches high. And even if we reduced them to say 48 or even 40 or something like that, would you let us go forward with that sign with the edge glow on it?
Before staff answers anything on that, Alder Haniro has a question.
It's a question for staff, and that is, what are you looking for to make this more of a mural? For example, putting the cardinal to the left and up from the C in cardinals, would that turn it from a sign to more of a mural?
I think, yeah, just in general, we were just looking at it, to be similar to a mural. So murals typically are not lighted. They have, certain additional graphics, like it's more, I don't know, the font is usually a little different, something like that to make it more graphic in nature. But I mean, I do understand how, they're muting the light, so it's not necessarily, just full face lit, which we do appreciate. But yeah, I guess it would be up to the commission to decide.
Could there be ways you could integrate that without the lights, but put some kind of a different colored banding around the edge that would create your differential, almost like a frame? But
yeah, that could be one approach to take, where you line the edge of the letter with like a white or some other bright color where you get the contrast from that point.
I think that's a very nice.
Yeah, I think
comment.
that, I mean, that's the
Yeah.
only issue concern I would have is the lights on that. I think that, but if you
Is
remove
there,
it, becomes much more just part of the face.
Mhm.
Is there a concern, and I'm kind of voicing conversations that I've heard on my end, of you think of when people use this facility, and some of the times it's going to be in the evening for a Friday night game or something like that. I would hate to not have this be stand out or be visible at night because it doesn't have the appropriate lighting to allow it to be read when the light levels in the area are darker.
Well,
And that's,
there's enough other light there when people are coming in that this is not going to be a dark entryway.
Yeah, I
don't
think
know.
the lighting would take care of that.
Yeah.
Personally, because,
the parking lot lighting.
well,
But
sometimes.
you're going to have you have to
Yeah,
lighting
under.
for people on the sidewalk walking in through the gates. All of that's going to be illuminated in lots of ways. And I'm sure you would have a lot of ambient light, but maybe it's a matter of rethinking a little bit about how you would put post
Well,
lights.
No, you're right. We do have some pedestal lights out in front.
Yeah.
I'm trying to determine what the spacing, the spacing isn't indicated on this plan that you have here that was submitted. But there are some lights in front. I'm just trying to ensure that the ambient light from that, because that's like a vertical surface. So anything that's underneath on the ceiling, horizontal, you're not going to get a ton of ambient. You'll get some reflection off the
When you play
pavement.
devil's
not a
advocate,
lot.
the light is only behind the sound. It's not going to illuminate the letters anyways. And if it's dark enough, you're worried about them not seeing the letters, the backlighting is not going to make them see the letters.
No, but you would see the
Trying not to be
outline of
scared
the
of-
letters.
Yeah.
You would see the outline of the letters. And I guess it's common if you drive around town, you probably see some retail establishments that do a backlit. You can kind of see what those look like at night. And if they didn't have the edge glow, they probably, you probably wouldn't recognize them that much.
I appreciate all of that discussion. I would like to point out that if the sign code is 100 square feet and you're asking for 400, if I'm getting this right, we do need a little bit of you to work with us. So.
Yeah, I agree.
If I may, and I was going to thank you, Mayor Kuhn, because you're going in the direction that I was going to suggest. So the motion, but I think I heard Alder Haniro mention is that she approves signs 2 and 3. But where I wanted to see clarification was, and to suggest, is that you conclude that sign 1 should be treated more as a mural, because if we treat it as a sign, then we need to get a sign variance. from the, then we will need to direct the applicant to get a sign variance if they want to keep the size the way it is. Our staff recommendation that Daphne articulated is to treat it as a mural. I'm having trouble talking tonight. But how is it that you are determining that it's a mural? Good grief, mural. So I heard it's consisting of metal with a subdued edge glow, but what else makes it a
Mural.
The cardinal.
Okay.
Throwing the
I
cardinal.
think
in
if
it.
you look at it that way, that would really be helpful so that we don't have to call this a sign.
I think that the idea is when you look at something, if the whole word cardinal sticks out, then it has an object like a sign. If it's somehow where it feels like you see it, but it feels like it's integrated into the thing behind it, it ceases to be a sign and becomes more part of the architecture. I don't have details, but that's where the lighting was the concern with me, is it separates it from everything around it. And if the letters feel like they feel as part of that facade, then it is a mural to me.
Chris, are you looking for this to be a mural or a sign?
I think, and I try to speak for the district, that they want the word cardinal to be recognizable and to stand out. I wouldn't intend that to be somewhat camouflaged in with the surface there.
Is
So what
representation of the word cardinal, is that the district's font and typeface? Because I don't recognize it.
it's what they've
Cardinals on stadiums.
and we could ask them if they're amenable to changing it, but that was the font that we designed for it, and they tended to like it. But that's not to say that.
But so it's not their
it can
brand,
change.
said earlier.
I'd say their brand changes, and it's relatively loose. It gets updated periodically. So there's a lot of things if you go through buildings that show the brand over the years.
Okay, I would like to clarify her prior question, which is, do you consider this a mural or a sign? Let's start with that.
Was that a question to me?
Yes.
I consider this a sign. I'd like it to be classified as a mural because and
or why don't you just put a sign variance on?
Yeah, it's gonna have to be a sign variance.
I like the backlit letters, by the way.
It's very
I like the design and I like the size. I think just submit for the variance and see if we can get it approved.
So
what can you explain to me a little bit on the process of that variance?
I would
for
ask
staff.
you to have that conversation with staff.
So I will amend my motion and just change it to say staff, or that we recommend approval for signs 2 and 3.
Do I have a second on that?
I'll second that.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, motion passes unanimously. And Chrisum, thank you for your patience and your honesty in your sign request. And you can work with staff
All
tomorrow.
right. Well, Abby, we can reach out to you tomorrow.
Okay,
Sounds
great.
good.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then next item is the specific implementation plan or SIP modification for sign design review, MH Imaging 2277 Deming Way. Staff, do you have any quick comments?
Yes, so this building itself already has, I think I miscounted it. There's only 8 signs existing on the building instead of 9. But these signs were already approved in 2013 for the Turville MRI suite. And so they're just replacing the signage that was already approved, and they're going much smaller than what was there before. We are recommending approval, but we would like to note that, any new signage that comes to this building, we would like to see come with a comprehensive sign plan, just because there are already kind of an excessive number of signs on this building. So other than that, we are recommending approval for
Well, I would,
this sign.
Schaefer, move approval. I don't think we can put in this motion
Right.
that we hope they do something different in the
Mhm.
future. So I move
Yeah.
approval.
Okay, hearing that, is there a second?
Herb, second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Just a question, Daphne or commission members, how do we get a more comprehensive sign package prepared for this building if it's in this case?
I think just having it reflected in the minutes and in our staff recommendations, since it was already there.
If I can add, I actually think it would be helpful to take one step back. The distinction between this agenda item and the previous one is that this is in a planned development district, and we have some flexibility to depart from standards. I mean, we like to base it on standards in our ordinance, but there is some flexibility recognizing the nature of PDD zoning in a specific implementation plan. For the previous item with the school, we had to do a strict interpretation of our sign code as it pertains to R1 zoning and institutional use in an R1 zoning district. In this case, there is flexibility. The comprehensive sign plan language in our zoning code is intended to apply to multi-tenant buildings that aren't necessarily in PDDs, but they certainly can, and we do encourage them for PDDs as well. So as Daphne mentioned, I think our expectation at the staff level going forward with this building in particular and other multi-tenant buildings is we want to see a comprehensive sign plan so we don't look at this stuff piecemeal. Sorry for the long-winded explanation.
All right, so any other discussion? Any questions? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. The last item is the 5-year street improvement plan.
Second to last item.
I'm sorry?
There's two more agenda
Oh,
items.
my apologies. The 5-year street improvement plan. Staff, do you have any short comments?
Yeah, this is an annual effort by our colleagues in the Public Works Department to update the 5-year street improvement plan. And over the last few years, we in the planning department have asked for the opportunity for this commission as well as the Ped-Bike Transit Committee to have the opportunity to weigh in on the priorities of the city as articulated in this plan. This planning document goes then and helps tie into the budget process, the city budget process. So what I flagged in this for next year is that the projects that are planned for, I don't know why I don't have that. The projects that they are listing for next year include the Parmenter Street project in green north of Century Avenue, south at Clark Street, which is next to, right there next to the roundabout. Wow. The Red Oak Court, Foxridge neighborhood, there's a street there, a couple streets, a few cul-de-sacs off of Kenyon, as well as south on Westfield. And then I think there was one on the east side, Lake Street, which of course is where the, and Dewey Court, which is where the apartment building that we discussed earlier is under construction. And Elmwood Avenue, I'm sorry, I missed that one. So for all of these streets, with the exception of Parmenter, let me look at my staff codes. We saw an opportunity to require the construction of sidewalks in conjunction with Clark Street, Red Oak Court, Lake Street, and then of course the Parmenter Street project. But as pointed out by our Public Works colleagues, they have a separate sidewalk program that they use to fund sidewalk improvements. And so traditionally these have not been linked together, but we see through our complete streets policy of the city, the bicycle network plan, we would like to start tying these together more so that when we look at streets, we look at them holistically, consistent with our complete streets policy. So we wanted to get your input on this, your feedback. It's going to the Ped-Bike Transit Committee on Thursday as well, to see if you have any priorities that are not reflected in this, specifically for the streets for next year, the green ones. We can discuss the other ones in the future. The yellow court, the Century Avenue corridor shown in yellow is a big one that we're going to discuss in future years.
This is not a criticism, just a clarification. You have that whole block where the train station is all blue for next year. What does that really mean? Because there's buildings and everything there, and you have that whole big wall.
I think that's for 2025, and that, I don't know why that's all shown in blue, but I suspect that's intended to show the
Part of
municipal
that's the
park.
restaurants, part of it's the library, part of it's
Well,
the alley. I don't know. the names of
Right,
the
good point. I think that was intended to show the municipal parking lot, but
Okay,
not obviously the entire block. I
Alright.
hadn't actually asked that question.
that's fine. That was just a point of.
Yeah.
Said, whoa, what's going on there?
All right, Alder Haniro.
Mark, you only want comments on next year, the 2024
Well,
project?
I'm not trying to, I welcome we welcome any feedback you have,
Okay.
but we wanted you
I
to
will
focus
try
on
to
next year.
focus on
Yeah.
24.
Yeah, no, we want to focus on next year, but we welcome any feedback you have.
I guess my question is, how are these projects determined? Are they, like the sidewalk plan that looks at different zones every year? Does the same thing apply to?
No,
streets?
that's and that's a question more for Public Works, but they basically do pavement rating analysis, it's called PASER, I think is what they use. So they, how they come up with the prioritization. I mean, these streets will move around from year to year. Sometimes they'll say, well, we can get another couple of years off of the street. They look at, I don't know how the master spreadsheet they have and how they make these decisions, but they basically try to project out what they can do in a reasonable chunk with a reasonable budget for a given year. Some streets require more reconstruction, others can just have a resurfacing. And so these have different costs. So they try to come up with a plan that can be funded theoretically is a manageable chunk that can be funded and managed by our staff and consultants. So where things get moved, you'll see every year that sometimes things get traded for 1 year to the next. I don't know how else to answer the question. From our standpoint in planning, we just want to make sure that our streets are complete streets, that they are as safe as we can make them for the most vulnerable Rotary user, making sure they have sidewalks, bike facilities, if they are arterial streets, major streets, collector streets, that sort of thing.
Okay. And I can talk to Sean about other, because I look at in my district, there aren't that many projects in my district. And one is Spring Hill Drive, High Road to Algonquin for 2025. And there's nothing wrong with that road as far as I can see. And then I have residents in Middleton Hills asking me, when is Frank Lloyd Wright going to be resurfaced,
Right.
especially where the dredging equipment was. But I can talk to Sean and try to make changes.
I suspect Spring Hill Drive is one of those cases where doing a more topical or surface repair is feasible now and prudent to maximize the lifespan of the street, whereas other streets are too far gone and just need a complete reconstruction. I mean, that's just putting it bluntly.
And then one last question about Century Avenue. Why would we do resurfacing of Century in 2026 if the bridge is going to be rebuilt in 2027? Does it not make sense to put those together?
I will make that note. I mean, that 2027 is what the county, Abby, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what they're currently projecting based on.
Bridge,
Yeah.
yep.
I'd love to have it bumped up to 2026, but anyway.
All right,
There's
real
a park to build.
quick, I want to clarify on the 3 streets with the sidewalks, Clark, Red Oak and Lake. I know Lake doesn't have sidewalks, or is Clark and Red Oak not have sidewalks as well?
They don't either, according to our comp plan
That's what
sidewalk
I'm-
gap analysis.
I just appreciate
Yeah.
that. I wanted to confirm that.
And our public works staff, when I broached this to them, they said, their focus is between the curbs, resurfacing between the curbs. Their sidewalk program is not in that quadrant next year, I don't think. So that's a separate program. But I think for us to articulate our concerns with respect to these street projects, making sure that they're complete streets compatible is I think the key for us.
Okay. I'm just sharing that at doors, sometimes people didn't always feel they needed a sidewalk.
Right.
So they just want to make sure that we're considering what neighbors want. I'm sure you've done that. So I'm not worried. Any other discussion?
Just had a question I know that the city's talking about putting roads on road diets. Is that reflected in the 5-year plan?
So none of these, well, except for the ones in green, which are in the course of being designed, as I understand it, the ones going forward will require a design. And that's the time to discuss the road diet concept. Our planning staff has discussed, I think we've discussed that with Plan Commission, have we? The road diet concept for Century. Ideally, all the way down to Branch Street would be great. If not, well, it's certainly from Branch Street to the west. It might have to be Donna Drive to the west. It depends on traffic volumes and doing a traffic study. But that would be something we should do before the street is designed. We should make that determination.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? All right. Hearing none.
I don't think we,
Did we have a
I
motion
don't
yet?
think we do.
Do I have a motion?
Or you're just looking for a recommendation?
Well,
But-
the agenda said possible action is to recommend to the Finance Committee and Common Council approval of the 5-year street improvement plan as recommended by the Public Works Committee. And I wonder if there's a way to add verbiage to that to emphasize the need to build complete streets.
To recommend the Finance and Common Council approval of the 5-year street improvement plan as recommended by Public Works Committee, comma, and then what language are you suggesting?
What is the number of our complete streets resolution?
The resolution number? You
I'd
could
like
say
to-
consistent with the city's complete streets policy.
That's fine, consistent with the. Well, I would even go stronger and say adhering to the
Okay.
complete streets, but. Okay, so if you,
With the design adhering to, with street design adhering to the city's complete streets policy.
with street design adhering to the city's complete streets policy. Yes, I like that.
Okay,
It's resolution 2022-48. Thanks, Abby.
okay, I like that. We're pulling that in. Did I have a second?
Yes, I didn't formally make the motion, but I will. And the motion is to recommend to the Finance Committee and Common Council approval of the 5-year street improvement plan as recommended by the Public Works Committee with street design consistent with the city's complete streets policy.
I think I thought I heard you say adhering to. You wanted to have a different word, I thought. Or now you want consistent?
You said consistent. I was,
Yeah, but then I heard you say adhering.
Yeah, the hearing.
oh,
Is
that's
there
what
a
I said?
preference?
All right.
I'll put whatever if you,
With street design consistent with the city's
that's fine.
complete streets policy.
Schaefer will second.
All right.
consistent with resolution 2022-48, the complete.
Yeah,
streets
and you
policy.
can cite that in parentheses.
Okay. Any discussion?
I did. Schaefer did.
I
Oh, just a second. Thank you. Any discussion?
just want to point out that I'm not familiar with the complete streets policy. Where can I find out about it?
We can help you. And for anyone out there that would like to learn more about complete streets, do you want to give a quick lowdown?
I can,
Staff?
so basically the idea is that we design all of our public rights of way, which is not just the pavement, but everything within the publicly owned right of way, including sidewalks, to make sure that they are designed to be as safe and accessible as possible to the most vulnerable roadway user. Recognizing the context that the street is in. So obviously the belt line, the freeway is not accessible, a suitable place for a pedestrian or bicyclist. But so it's a context sensitive approach, design approach, making sure that safety is maximized for the most vulnerable roadway user.
And I will add, making sure that we have bikes and pedestrian friendly things. And I say that because we care about our cars, but we want to make sure our buses get there and that our walkers and our bikers are safe too, especially since we were talking earlier about Century Avenue and how hard it is. So I have become a great fan of complete streets, and I'm learning more, especially because Lake Street is in my district, and we're trying to look at how do you incorporate that. So if you ever want to learn more, I know a little bit, but staff can educate you. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
And we have the policy on our website under the planning department page too. We can send you a link.
Awesome.
Oh, you did, right?
Thank you. I'll read up on it just in case I need to get better. Next up, and it's the last item, the concept review for Amendment 2 to the City of Middleton Comprehensive Plan. Staff, do you have short comments?
Yes, so the comprehensive plan is the guiding document for land use and the city's 20-year vision to the future. It was approved in 2021. We have had one periodic amendment to the comprehensive plan, and now we are kicking off a formal review and amendment. We have 5 reasons listed here in this memo that we are recommending revisions to the plan. A lot of it has just been that we've had a couple of years now to work with it, and we use it almost every day. So it's still very much a living document. And as we continue to use the document, we realize some things that we would propose to change or improve. And then the other major reason is that we have a full draft now of the zoning ordinance, which Mark will be bringing to the Plan Commission for an initial review at the next meeting. And we need to ensure consistency. That is one area where state law requires that our zoning ordinance, as well as our subdivision ordinance and our official map are all consistent with our comprehensive plan. So that is a requirement under the smart growth planning law. We have included in your packet a spreadsheet with several changes that we're proposing. I do not want to go over each one of those because it's already getting late, but I'll just highlight that the items showing in pale green are straightforward. They're things that we have completed and we'd like to move those to implementation now. The items in tan are consistency. So those are where we have another planning document that's been revised and we want to ensure that the comprehensive plan is consistent with the rest of the city's goals and initiatives. The items in white, I would like to go over in detail. Those are flu map changes or changes that we are proposing to the future land use map. The future land use map is the document that we consult anytime we meet with a developer who's proposing a project. So if anyone is going to be requesting a rezoning, we look at the future land use map to see if the rezoning that is being proposed is consistent with the future land use map. There are 2 items 1 and 2, which we called out in your packet, and I would also like to propose a 3rd future land use map change. The first item is along Allen Boulevard. There is a site that has never developed. It's in the city limits. It's privately owned. It is not a park. It has been leased previously for a soccer field, but it is privately owned as a development site that has never been developed. We were showing that on the future land use map as single family residential, which is a mistake that was made because we converted our city's zoning ordinance map to the future land use map as the baseline. And then we changed parcels working with the Plan Commission and other entities. This should not show as single family residential because we do not have any parcels within the city limits that are single family exclusive. The neighborhoods that are currently single family are shown as established neighborhoods. So those are areas where it could be a single family home, it could be a duplex, it could be a 3-unit building. So for this property, what we had originally proposed is showing that as avenue mixed use, which is the most consistent classification for major commercial corridors that are well served by transit. However, I would also like to propose for consideration by the Plan Commission that this might be an instant where we might want to look at splitting the future land use designation, splitting the parcel into more than one classification. The reason for that is we do have smaller lot single family housing immediately to the east. And so this might be an area where we would want to see some missing middle housing as a transition or a buffer between avenue mixed use, which may accommodate higher density, and the lower density neighborhood to the east. We don't have to make any decisions tonight. These are just things I wanted to initially put out for the Plan Commission to begin considering. The second change is we have a mistake where we are showing some areas that are conservancy land as established neighborhood, and those are owned by the city, and they are, although they were platted as residential lots, they're owned by the city and they are long-term conservancy land. So this is a mistake. We're proposing to change it to conservancy.
Can you, so they're the ones on the left that are yellow above Century?
Yeah, and then there is one more lot south of Century next to the pink. That is, again, a mistake. It's showing vacant and single family residential. And as Abby said, we don't have any lots identified as single family. So this was just kind of skipped over. And so we're just proposing to change that to yellow as all the other residential ones are. And then, yeah, the ones above Century that are now green is what we're proposing to correct to just remain as conservancy.
That agricultural vacant designation currently, isn't that lot for sale? right now?
Yes.
I believe so.
Is there any, do we have any feelers on what's happening there?
We have met with probably a dozen different entities that have asked for information about what the city wants to see on that property. It's been for sale for a couple of years, but nobody has, I don't think any proposals have come forward to the Plan Commission yet.
But why was that not designated as the neighborhood mixed use, like the parcels right adjacent to it?
That's a good question. I think just the existing land use on that, that like weird beige color was a single family. And so that was just kind of converting it into that established neighborhood. But yeah, this is a proposed change. So if you would like to see it changed to neighborhood mixed use, that's certainly possible.
I mean, just my opinion would be that it would be more consistent with what's happening immediately around it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have no objection to that. And that makes a lot of sense with it being on a, you know, commercial road that's well served by transit.
Okay, so do I have a motion?
One more.
Oh yeah, I do have one more.
You have one more? No, it's okay. I just don't want to be throwing out ideas. We really haven't gotten a discussion yet, so.
So this one is just outside of the city limits, but it is in the city's planned growth area. And it's the dark gray parcel that's shown, or maybe even showing up as black on some of your screens.
What roads are these?
So this is just west
14.
of the airport, or I'm sorry, the old business park. This is on Capitol Court. And this is a site that's owned by DRS Asphalt and Paving. I think it's a 14-acre site. Yeah, thank you for the context map. So the west edge of the city, just north of Highway 14 and west of the old business park.
And that's changing to,
So we would promote, or we would propose, I'm sorry, changing this to general industrial. Right now it's showing as extraction and disposal. If that were to be brought into the city, I don't think that the city would want to support that type of land use at that location.
Well,
It
it's
is-
already, it's already like businesses and warehouses back there, isn't it already?
Yes, yeah, so industrial is consistent with pretty much everything else that's in the area. The concern that we had right now is we're working with our city attorney. We had a work session and we're laying out different categories of land uses. And if we were to keep this as extraction and disposal and approve a zoning ordinance that enables land uses like quarrying and things like that, we would potentially put ourselves into a situation where we would be under a lot of pressure to allow certain types of land uses that we wouldn't want if it were to be brought into the city. Also, industrial is more consistent with what is in the area. And also the property is for sale right now. So we have, anytime a property goes on the market, we begin to get calls, which is why we consulted with the future land use map and noticed that it had that classification.
And you've also got wetlands and things back there too, and so would be an issue with the
Yes, yeah, in fact,
extraction and disposal.
the northwest corner of the site
Yeah.
is showing as environmental corridor and wetland. And you can actually
Marsh.
see what looks like an intermittent stream or a stream that goes through the northwest.
So Alder Haniro has a question.
Or we could overlay the environmental corridor.
Alder
So
Haniro.
I'm wondering what action you need from the plan commission tonight? Is it changes to the future land use map to deal with that situation? Or is this all just discussion tonight?
This is just discussion. There is one thing that I would like to get some guidance on, because before we begin making any changes, we have one really important question that we need for the plan commission to weigh in on. So typically when we bring a document before the plan commission and the common council where we're proposing changes to an existing document, we use a red line markup where it's striked through the text that we're removing and then redline the text that we're proposing. That is going to make our lives very difficult if we require a red line for this document, because it is all formatted with images, and we did all of the formatting and graphic design in-house thanks to our wonderfully talented associate planner. We would prefer to go ahead, with once you all are okay with the spreadsheet and we've kind of added things that you want to see added and taken things out that maybe you don't agree with, we would like to format everything into the document and put it in red text. If it's being moved, changed, or if it's new, it would all just be in red text, but we would not have any strike throughs, so that we can format the whole document and present it to the plan commission and the council so that you can see all the changes in red, but that we won't have to do a red line markup.
Because the software doesn't allow that.
It's in PowerPoint, isn't it?
Yes, it's in PowerPoint.
I have no objections to that.
No objections.
And what is your timeline for completing this? I guess I'm asking because I do have a lot of comments. I am mindful of the time, and I would like to come up with more comments. So I'm happy to send you my comments as long as I understand that we're going to be coming back to this.
Yes. Yeah,
More than
we'll have
once.
more time for the plan commission to review this. Eventually, the plan commission will need to set a public hearing. There is a 30-day notice requirement. We have to notify surrounding jurisdictions. There are several steps that we have to take. This is just the preliminary look. We've got, this won't all be said and done for a couple of months at least.
Okay, good. One change I would definitely like to see, and I don't think it's to the plan itself, but rather the use of the plan. You mentioned that staff works in this every day, you really follow the plan, and that's terrific. I will tell you that when we did the budget last year as finance chair, one of the things I did was I searched the budget request document to see how many times a comprehensive plan was mentioned. And I think it was mentioned in a specific context, not just like, we will implement the comprehensive plan. It was only mentioned once in a capital project request. And that's not to say that the projects or the narratives weren't addressing things that were in the comprehensive plan, but there was no cross-reference, like, this is why we're doing this project, because it's part of our or it's consistent with our plan. So I really want to see that change. And I know Brian Gatto is working on that. So look forward to seeing all the requests referencing the comp plan and others.
Excellent. So any other comments, any comments on things that you're okay with? I was okay with lots of it. I know there was some dialogue on one or two pieces, could go either way. Yeah, I trust the group to give guidance or move forward with staff thoughts. Other than that,
Or Mayor
anything?
Kuhn, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So is it okay if the minutes reflect that commissioners, by consensus, you supported the flu map changes that Abby went through with the Allen Boulevard parcel divided to allow lower density housing along Middleton Beach Road and designating a lot on Century Avenue as neighborhood mixed use? That's the feedback I got based on her remarks.
Yeah.
Just this one. Yeah,
that's.
Yeah, the number
Right
will-
to me, yeah.
the number one is
The
fine.
industrial use.
And the, yeah.
That was already something she
Two.
was proposing. So those are the only changes from what, I just wanted to, that way by consensus.
Changes from what was proposed to change.
Yeah, and so this is what we'll include in the next iteration of the future land use map. And we recognize that commissioners, Alder Hanairo, for example, and maybe others of you will be sending us comments for text enhancements.
I just
Need a
want to say
formal-
that I do read the comprehensive plan pretty often and refer back to it when I'm looking over agendas and plans, and I love it. I think it's great. So.
Okay.
Very well. And so I'll come back to you. So there's no motion necessary. This was for discussion.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying. All right, so with that, my computer went to bed this time. All right, so with that, we are at the adjourning. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second that. This is Hanairo.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously, and have a wonderful night. Thanks.
Thank you.
This close.